My fiancée canceled our wedding saying, "I don't love you anymore, it's over." I accepted it calmly and walked away. Months later, she attended a wedding at the same venue and realized I was the groom standing there. "I don't love you anymore." She said it the way you'd cancel a dentist appointment. Not cruel, not broken, just done. Like the feeling had an expiry date, and the date was today, and she'd already moved on before she finished the sentence. I didn't say anything. I stood there in the kitchen we'd painted together, that awful dusty blue she'd chosen and I pretended to like. And I looked at her, and I thought, she's already rehearsed this. The way her chin was lifted, the way her hands weren't shaking. She'd said these words before, in the mirror probably, maybe to a friend, maybe to someone else entirely. "It's over," she added, as though the first part needed a period. And the thing that would haunt me for months wasn't the words. It was how calm I felt. Because somewhere underneath the shock, underneath the part of me that had already started running calculations, the venue deposit, the invitations, the suit hanging in the closet with the dry cleaning tag still on, there was a quieter voice saying, "You already knew. I just hadn't let myself know it yet." I nodded once. I said, "Okay." And I walked out of that kitchen, out of that apartment, out of that chapter. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that 9 months later, she would walk into that same wedding venue and realize the groom standing at the altar was me. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Let me back up just a little. I was 29. She was 27. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. Her name was Petra, and for a long time, I thought she was the most fascinating person I'd ever met. We met at a friend's housewarming party, the kind where nobody actually warms the house. They just stand around holding drinks and pretending to be interested in the art on the walls. I was doing exactly that, staring at a framed print that I'm still not sure was intentional art or a mistake, when she appeared next to me and said, "It's upside down, you know." It wasn't upside down, but I laughed anyway, because the confidence of the claim was something else entirely. That was Petra. She said things like they were true, and you believed them before you checked. She had this energy, magnetic, a little chaotic, and when she focused it on you, you felt like the most interesting version of yourself. Like the life you were living was actually worth narrating. We fell into it fast. Weekend trips, shared playlists, that specific intimacy of learning someone's sleep schedule and their coffee order and the exact face they make when they're pretending not to be upset. By year 2, it felt inevitable. She said yes before I even finished asking. I didn't notice the shift until later. And even when I did notice it, I told myself I was imagining things. Here's what I told myself. Every long relationship has cold patches. Every couple goes through phases where the conversation thins out, where you're physically in the same room, but somehow miles apart. I told myself it was stress, work pressure, the planning itself, because wedding planning, I discovered, has a specific kind of gravity that pulls two people either closer together or in completely opposite directions. With us, it was the second one. But I kept repainting it. She's tired. She's overwhelmed. The catering situation stressed her out. She doesn't mean it when she snaps. I'm good at that. Repainting. Finding the version of events that lets everyone off the hook, especially the person I love. There was one night, about 6 weeks before she ended it, where we were sitting on the couch, and I reached over to hold her hand, and she didn't pull away, but she didn't hold back either. Her hand just sat in mine, neutral, like a borrowed object. I remember thinking, this feels different. And then I changed the channel and ordered Thai food, and we didn't talk about it. I didn't realize it then, but that moment was already the end. She ended it on a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Tuesday had always been our night. We had this running joke that Tuesday was the most underrated day of the week, the day nobody expected anything from, the day you could just be low-key and exist without performance. She picked Tuesday to end our engagement. I've thought about whether that was intentional. I've decided it wasn't. Petra didn't do subtle cruelty. If she wanted to hurt you, she just said the thing, which, in some ways, made it worse. "I don't love you anymore. It's over." She said it standing by the kitchen counter, still in her coat. She'd just come home. I'd been making pasta. The water was still boiling behind me when she said it. And for some reason that's the detail I remember most clearly, that absurd domestic sound underneath those words. The cheerful rolling boil of water that had no idea what was happening. I turned off the stove. I said, "Is there something you want to talk about?" She shook her head. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to get married. Not to." She stopped. Adjusted. I just don't want it. Not to you. That's what she'd started to say. I heard the whole sentence, even from the half she gave me. How long? I asked. She looked at the window. A few months. A few months. While I was looking at florists. While I was arguing with my best friend. His name is Connor. I'll get to him. About whether the bar should be open the whole reception or just during dinner. While I was lying in bed next to her, thinking we were just going through a rough patch. A few months. Okay, I said. She blinked. I think she expected something else. An argument. Tears. Some version of me that would fight for it, beg for it, make her feel like she was breaking something that couldn't be rebuilt. I just said okay, and I walked out. I stayed at Connor's place for 2 weeks. Connor is my oldest friend. We grew up on the same street, went to different universities, ended up in the same city by coincidence, and then by choice. He's the kind of person who doesn't ask too many questions, but makes sure you're eating. He'd have a plate of something in front of me before I even registered I was hungry. He didn't say much about Petra. Not at first. He just let me be in whatever the feeling was. On about the 5th night, I asked him, "Did you know? Did you see it coming?" He was quiet for a long time. "I thought you might be ignoring some things," he said finally. "I didn't know it was this close." "What things?" He looked uncomfortable. "It's not important now." "Connor." He set down his fork. "I saw her once. At a bar. With a group of people I didn't recognize. Maybe 8 months ago. She didn't see me. I would have gone over, but..." He paused. "She looked like she was having the best night of her life. And the way she was with one of those people." He didn't finish. I sat with that for a while. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure," he said. "And because you were happy. Or I thought you were happy. I didn't want to blow up your life on a feeling." I wasn't angry at him. I wanted to be, but I couldn't make it land. Because I understood exactly what he'd done. The same thing I'd done, every time I noticed something and repainted it. We'd both protected the version of the story where everything was fine. I didn't ask him who the person was. Some truths are complete enough without all the details. The weeks after were strange. Not dramatic. Not the cinematic kind of grief where you wander through rain and stare at old photographs. It was quieter than that. More like static. Like someone had turned the volume down on my life, and I was waiting for it to come back up. I went back to the apartment. She'd already left, taken most of her things, left the dusty blue walls and the upside-down print she'd brought from her old place. I stood in the middle of it and realized I didn't know which parts of the space were mine anymore. We'd built the whole thing together, or I'd thought we had. I canceled the vendors one by one. That was its own particular kind of awful. Not the big things. The venue deposit was gone, obviously, but the small ones. The woman who was going to bake our cake called me back personally to express condolences, and something about that small kindness from a stranger I'd only spoken to twice nearly undid me completely. I did not fall apart. I want to be clear about that. Not because I'm proud of it. I'm not sure it was even healthy, but because it matters to what comes later. I kept the apartment. Repainted 2 walls. Found out, slowly, that I liked the quiet. That there were parts of my own personality that had been turned down to background noise over 3 years, and they started coming back up. I started running in the mornings. Not for any reason. Just to have somewhere to be at 6 a.m. that wasn't the inside of my own head. And somewhere around the 3-month mark, I met Noelle. It wasn't a meet cute. I don't have a charming story about how we bumped into each other or locked eyes across a room. She was a colleague of my friend Adrienne's. We all ended up at the same dinner. Noelle was quiet at first. The kind of quiet that isn't shyness, just selectiveness. She said things when she had something to say, and she didn't fill silence with noise just to fill it. I noticed that immediately. After 3 years with someone who commanded every room she entered, there was something almost startling about a person who was comfortable not performing. We talked for most of the dinner. About nothing important. A documentary she'd watched, a hiking trail I'd done the month before, the specific phenomenon where food always tastes better outdoors. But at the end of the night, I realized I couldn't remember the last time a conversation had felt that easy. Adrienne, subtle as a foghorn, texted me 20 minutes after I got home. So, I didn't reply, but I thought about her. We went on our first proper date 6 weeks later. I want to be honest. I was nervous in a way I hadn't expected. Not first date nervous. Something deeper. Because I'd spent 3 years building a life with someone, and it had come undone quietly and without warning. And somewhere in me was this very reasonable fear that I didn't know how to read people anymore. That the instincts I thought I had were broken. Noelle knew about the engagement. Adrienne had told her something. Not everything, but enough. She didn't ask about it on the first date. Or the second. On the third, she brought it up herself, gently, not intrusively. You don't have to tell me about it, she said. But if you ever want to, I'm not going to treat it like a damage report. A damage report? I laughed. Where did that come from? People do that, she said. They ask about someone's past like they're checking for dents before they decide whether to buy the car. I don't need to do that. I looked at her and thought, who are you? I told her eventually. Not everything. Not the Connor conversation. Not the half-sentence Petra had started and stopped. Just the shape of it. The ending and the quiet after. She listened without expression. Not cold, just attentive. When I finished, she said, that sounds like it was very lonely. Even before it ended. I had to look away because she was right, and nobody had put it exactly that way, and the precision of it landed somewhere undefended. We were together for 4 months when I knew. I don't mean I knew she was the one in some cinematic lightning bolt way. I mean I knew I wasn't performing, wasn't managing, wasn't reading the temperature of the room and adjusting my behavior to keep something stable that was secretly already tilting. I was just there, with her, and it was easy in a way that had nothing to do with effort. That's the thing nobody tells you. Easy doesn't mean boring. Easy means the foundation is solid. It means you're not spending half your energy on structural maintenance, and you can actually build something. I asked her father's permission the old-fashioned way, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because it felt like the right acknowledgement of something real. He looked at me for a long time, asked me one question, just one. Does she make you better, or do you make her better, or is it both? Both, I said. He nodded once. That was it. Now I have to tell you about the venue. When Noelle and I started talking about the wedding, which happened faster than either of us planned, because neither of us was interested in long engagements, she mentioned a specific place. A converted estate about 40 minutes outside the city. Old stone building. Gardens that had been kept with that particular kind of manicured wildness. A reception hall with windows that ran floor to ceiling and let in the afternoon light like something from a painting. I knew the place. Of course I knew the place. It was the same venue Petra and I had booked. I sat with that for a moment when Noelle showed me the photos. She was watching my face. She always watched my face, quietly, not intrusively, and she said, "Is this okay?" Yes, I said, and I meant it. Because here was the thing. The venue hadn't done anything to me. It was just a place. Stone and glass and light. What happened there, or what didn't happen there, was between two people, and one of those people was gone, and the other one was sitting next to me showing me pictures with that careful hopefulness she had. I love it, I told her. And that was true too. We booked it. We set the date. And I didn't think about Petra again for a long time. The week before the wedding, Connor called me. It was late, and his voice had that specific texture that meant he'd been thinking about something for a while before he dialed. I need to tell you something, he said. And I want to tell you now, before the weekend, because I don't want it landing on you in the wrong moment. I sat down. Tell me. Petra's going to be at the wedding. I was quiet. Not ours, he added quickly. There's another wedding happening at the venue the day before. Different couple. She's a guest. Adrian found out through someone at work. Petra knows the bride, apparently. They overlap through some old friend group. Okay, I said. Are you okay? I'm fine, Connor. Because you always say that. I know. This time I mean it. There was a pause. She doesn't know it's the same venue as yours. Or that you're getting married there the next day. She definitely doesn't know you're marrying Noelle. I thought about that for a moment. The specific geometry of it. Her arriving at that venue for someone else's joy, not knowing mine was following one day behind. It doesn't matter, I said. Right? Yeah. I wanted you to have the information. I appreciate it, I said. Genuinely. But I'm not thinking about her. I'm thinking about Saturday. And I was. I absolutely was. But I'd be lying if I said some quiet part of me didn't file the information away. Saturday came in clear and cold and gold. The kind of October morning that makes you feel like the world has been repainted overnight. We were getting ready at the venue itself, and I stood in the room they'd given us, looking out at the garden, and I felt something I had no adequate word for. Not nervousness. Something quieter. A settling. Connor was beside me, already in his suit, already on his second cup of coffee. You good? He asked. More than, I said. He clapped me on the shoulder. Didn't say anything else. That's the thing about the right people. They know when to talk and when to just stand there. The morning went the way mornings do before weddings. Organized chaos, small panics about nothing that matters, the specific comedy of 20 people all needing the same mirror at the same time. The florist did something extraordinary with the ceremony space. Noelle's sister cried 3 different times before the ceremony even started. I stood at the altar at 2 in the afternoon and watched her walk toward me. And this is the part where I could describe the dress, the flowers she was holding, the way the afternoon light was doing exactly what we'd hoped through those floor-to-ceiling windows. But none of that is the point. The point is the moment she reached me, and I took her hand, and she looked at me and said, quietly, just for me, "Hi." Just that. "Hi." And something in my chest that had been quietly braced for a very long time finally let go. The ceremony was short. Neither of us wanted long. We'd written our own vows, which was my idea, which I then regretted when I actually had to write them, which I then stopped regretting the moment I said them out loud. I won't repeat them here. They're hers. The reception moved to the great hall. Those windows, that light, now going amber and long-shadowed as the afternoon turned. The band was good. The food was better. My father-in-law danced with Noelle in a way that made the whole room go quiet, then go loudly happy. I was standing at the edge of the room, holding a glass of something, watching the people I loved be happy in a room I loved, when Connor appeared at my elbow. His face was doing something unusual. "Don't panic," he said, which is never a reassuring way to start a sentence. "What?" "She's here." I looked at him. "What do you mean she's here? The other wedding was yesterday." "I know." Apparently a group of them stayed over at the venue's guest house. They came into the main estate to get some air or something. I don't know the whole story, but she's in the garden. He paused. "She saw you through the window." I set down my glass. "Where is she?" "She's still outside." Connor lowered his voice. "She looked like she'd seen a ghost." I thought about that. About the specific experience of walking into somewhere expecting nothing and suddenly seeing the shape of a life you'd thought you'd closed the chapter on. "Is she going to come in?" I asked. "I don't think she knows what to do," he said honestly. I looked across the room at Noelle. She was laughing at something her cousin had said, her head tilted back, completely unaware of anything outside of that circle of warmth. "Does Noelle know?" I asked. "Not yet." "Tell her," I said. "Don't let her find out from someone else." Connor nodded. He went. I watched him reach Noelle, lean in, say something quiet. I watched her expression process it. First a small frown, then something more complicated, then a look directly at me. I walked over to her. "You okay?" she said. She asked me first. That's the thing about her. She always checks for other people before she checks the situation. "I'm completely fine," I told her. "I just wanted you to know. I'm not going out there. She's not part of today." Noelle looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded, slowly, and took my hand, and that was that. We went back to the dance floor. I didn't go out to the garden. I want to be clear about that choice, because it would have been so easy to go. Curiosity, if nothing else. Some quiet part of me that still wanted, what? Acknowledgement? An apology? Something to close a door that I hadn't known was still partially open? But I didn't go, because there was nothing to say, and nowhere better to be than where I was. It was Connor who told me, later, what she'd seen. She had been walking through the grounds with 2 friends from the wedding, the overnight guests, wandering in the early evening, probably looking for somewhere to sit with drinks. They'd come around the side of the estate, and the windows of the great hall had lit up like a lantern in front of them. The band, the dancing, the amber light. A wedding in full swing. And then she'd seen the groom. Connor had it from a friend of a friend who'd been in that garden group. One of those chains of connection that only seems unlikely until you remember that the world is actually quite small and venue guest books don't have exclusivity clauses. She'd stopped. Her friends had kept walking for a moment before they realized she wasn't with them. She'd stood at that window looking in, looking at me, looking at who I was standing next to, whose hand I was holding, whose day this was. And then she'd said something to her friends. Connor's source didn't catch the words, just the tone, and she'd walked quickly back toward the guest house. That's the whole of it. She didn't come in. She didn't knock. She didn't ask for a conversation or a moment or a do-over. She just saw it, all of it, framed in golden light through a window she hadn't expected to be looking through, and she left. I've thought about what she must have felt. Not with satisfaction. I want to be careful about that. Not with cruelty. Not with that specific human pleasure of see, you lost something real. Those feelings are understandable, but I don't think they serve anyone, and I was in too good a place that night to contaminate it with something that small. But I've thought about it, because I'm human and I'm honest. She must have walked around that corner expecting an empty garden and found instead the full, lit-up evidence of a life she'd walked away from. Not a sad life. Not a broken life. Not a man who'd spent 8 months in the dark. A man standing in a room full of people who loved him, beside a woman who was clearly loved and clearly happy, on a day that was clearly joyful in a way that didn't need to announce itself. The venue she'd known about. The venue she'd been at for someone else's celebration the night before, and it had meant nothing particular. But now it meant something. I wondered if she remembered the deposit. The paperwork. The afternoon we'd toured the estate, and she'd run her hand along the old stone wall of the garden corridor and said, "This is it. This is the one." I wondered if it hit her that she'd been right about the venue and wrong about everything else. I don't know. I wasn't there. I was inside, dancing badly to a song I love, with my wife's hand in mine. Here's the thing about walking away calmly. People see it as stoicism, strength. That particular male mythology of the man who doesn't flinch, doesn't break, just nods and walks out without visible damage. It wasn't that. When I walked out of that kitchen 8 months before this wedding, I wasn't strong. I was in a specific kind of shock that looks like composure from the outside. The world had just rearranged itself without permission, and I was doing the only thing I knew how to do when I didn't know what to do. I kept moving. The calmness wasn't peace. Not then. Peace came later. Peace came in pieces, a run through a neighborhood I'd started to love, a dinner where I laughed until my ribs hurt, a morning where I woke up and the first thought I had wasn't her, but just an ordinary thought about coffee and the day ahead. Peace came on a third date when a woman said the words damage report, and the phrase opened something in me like a window. Peace came incrementally, unannounced, the way all the good things seem to come, not in a moment, but in the accumulation of many small moments until one day you look back and realize the weight is gone. I want to say this because I think it matters. I don't believe in the version of this story where I walked away from Petra cool and unbothered and immediately became my best self. That's not what happened. What happened was messier, slower, more confused. What happened was that I lost something I'd built a future around, and I grieved it. And then I kept going because there isn't really an alternative to keeping going. And somewhere in the going on I found something better. Not better as in revenge. Better as in actually better. Built differently. Solid in a way the first thing wasn't. You can't know a structure is shaky until you compare it to one that isn't. I found out more eventually. Not from Petra, we never spoke again, not properly. But from the particular information osmosis that happens in overlapping social circles whether you want it or not. The person Connor had seen her with that night. The person she'd been with, or becoming with, or whatever the appropriate verb is for something you're not supposed to be doing, was someone she'd worked with. It had started, apparently, around the same time she'd started pulling away. Not a dramatic affair, or not one that anyone characterized dramatically. Just a slow redirection of interest, the way water finds a new course before it announces itself as a flood. She hadn't told me because she either hadn't wanted to or hadn't been honest enough with herself to name it yet. I don't know which, and it doesn't matter now. What I know is this. She hadn't loved me anymore, or she'd loved me differently than I needed, or the version of love she was capable of for me had run its course. And instead of saying so, she'd let me plan a wedding and tile a future and choose a venue, while something else was quietly rerouting. That's the part that stinks, not the ending. The ending, I came to understand, was actually the kindest thing she did. She ended it before the wedding, before the photos and the signatures and the legal entanglement, before children, God forbid, or a mortgage, or another decade. She gave me back my life while there was still enough of it to build something new. I've tried to be grateful for that. Some days it's easy. Connor made a toast at the reception that reduced approximately half the room to tears. He talked about the kind of person I am, which was uncomfortable because I'm not great at being talked about. And then he talked about the kind of partnership he'd watched develop over the past several months and what it had looked like from the outside. He said, "I've known this man for 22 years, and I have never once seen him as simply himself as I have in this last year. Whatever she does to him, whatever the two of them do for each other, it turned up something I didn't know was turned down." Noel squeezed my hand under the table. He raised his glass. "To people who see each other clearly. To people who see each other clearly." I thought about that for a long time afterward. What it means to be seen. Not managed, not performed for, not adjusted to fit, just seen, with honest eyes, and found acceptable. More than acceptable. Wanted. Noel asked me, on the drive to the place we were staying that night, if I was glad she'd happened to love the same venue. It was dark outside and the countryside was moving past, and her head was resting against the window, And the question came out of nowhere in that particular way her questions sometimes did. "Why do you ask?" I said. "Because I know what that venue was," she said. "The original version of it. For you." I kept my eyes on the road. "You asked me when you first showed me the photos if it was okay." "I know. I meant it when I said yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I know that too. I want to know if it was complicated. Not for me. Just for you. Whether today had a shadow somewhere." I thought about it. "Honestly, it didn't," I said. "The venue isn't a place I'd been before. It's a place I'd imagined being. What I imagined and what actually happened there tonight, they're not the same thing. The imagined version is just gone, like a draft that got replaced by the finished work." She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more tender. "A draft that got replaced by the finished work," she said. "I'm using that." "It's yours," I told her. "There are things I know now that I didn't know when this started. I know that the absence of conflict is not the same as the presence of peace. I know that someone choosing you partly and quietly is more corrosive than someone leaving honestly. I know that calm, when it arrives after grief, doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like ground underfoot where there wasn't any. I know that loving someone well looks different from loving someone intensely, and that I'd confused the two for longer than I should have. I know that Connor is the best person I've ever had in my corner, and that I should probably tell him that more often. I know that Noelle will read this, or some version of it, eventually, because she finds everything, which is one of her qualities that is simultaneously wonderful and keeps me honest. And I know that when she does, she'll make that small specific sound she makes when something lands correctly for her. Not a word, just a sound, like a period at the end of something true. Somebody asked me, a few months after the wedding, whether I thought Petra had planned to be at the venue that weekend. I said no, absolutely not. But then I thought about it more. About the specific coincidence of her group choosing the guest house for the overnight. About whether she'd known, consciously or not, through some chain of mutual connections and overheard details, that I was getting married there. And honestly, I still don't know. What I know is that it doesn't change anything. Whether it was coincidence or some semi-conscious pull toward a door she'd closed. Neither version alters what she saw through that window. Neither version changes what I had to come home to. She saw a man she'd once loved standing in the full happiness of a life he'd built without her. Whether she meant to see it or not, she saw it. And I hope, genuinely, without performance, without cruelty, that the sight of it told her something useful. About what she'd had. About what she'd needed that she hadn't had the language to ask for. About whatever she'd been moving toward when she redirected. I hope she found it. I hope it was worth it. I hope she stood in her own version of that golden light eventually, holding somebody's hand, and felt the weight go. I'm not being noble. I'm being honest. Hating her would require me to keep carrying in a direction that has nowhere to go. The last thing I want to tell you is this. 3 months after the wedding, Noelle and I were walking near our apartment. We'd moved to a new place. Ours from the beginning, no old colors on the walls. And we passed a kitchen supply store, and she stopped in front of the window and pointed to a specific shade of paint sample in a display. "What do you think of that?" she said. It was blue, not dusty. A deeper, richer blue. The kind of blue that looked deliberate. I looked at it. "I love it," I said. "And this time, I'm in it completely." She said it was over. I accepted it, walked away, and quietly built something she would one day see through a window and recognize as everything she'd let go. The water was still boiling when she ended it. I just turned off the stove and started over.